Yeah.
Hello,
Yeah.
Professor.
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
I'm
I'm
good,
doing.
thank you. How are you?
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, can you hear us well?
I can hear you well, yes, very well. In fact,
That's
just trying to
amazing.
set up a few things to make sure that I have everything in order. Just 1 second, please.
Okay, he's here.
Okay, so I think that I'm basically all set.
Thank you very much. So, good evening from Vietnam and welcome to this very special online interview brought to you by Omega Plus Vietnam and our honorable guests. It is our privilege to have the three scholars here with us today. So, first of all, this is Professor Oded Galor, and he's the author of the upcoming book, The Journey of Humanity. He's talking to us from the United States. So, hello, Professor. How are you today?
I'm very well and delighted to be with you and to share some of the insights that I gathered in the book Journey of Humanity with your audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. We are really happy to have you here with us today. Next, we have Dr. Thành Tự Anh from Fulbright University, Vietnam. But according to what I know, he's not talking to us from Vietnam today. So, can you tell us a little bit about your location, please?
I am currently visiting Oxford. I'm currently visiting Stockholm School of Economics. I spent a year on sabbatical leave and working on my own book as well.
Thank you very much. You are on a really busy schedule, but you can arrange some time for us today. We are really appreciate for your presence. And finally, we
Thank you.
have Dr. Nguyễn Thắng from the University of Osaka, Japan, and he's talking to us from Europe right now. Okay. So, hello, Dr. Thắng. Can you please tell me a little bit about the weather in Europe right now?
Yes, very nice. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be here to discuss with Professor Gallo and all of you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, all right. So, once again, on behalf of the Omega Plus team, I would like to thank you all so much for being here with us today. So, let's jump right into the main part of our interview, shall we? All right. So today we are here to get to know more about Professor Oded Galor, or more exactly, the ideas that he wishes to convey through his latest release, The Journey of Humanity, The Origins of Wealth and Inequality. So the book made such a great hit after its first release in Hebrew, and it is now sold the rights to more than 30 territories and languages. And Vietnam is so delighted to be the 30th on the list. So, Professor, how are you feeling about this?
Well, it's as just suggested. Indeed, the book is being released in 30 different territories, and this is really delighting to witness, because I think that, as you will realize, the insights from the book are tremendously important for the ability of societies and the ability of the world as a whole to mitigate inequality. In this respect, exposing a very wide audience to these ideas perhaps can help the world as a whole to move into a better position to generate universal prosperity and low level of inequality across nations and within nations.
Wow, thank you so much for your sharing. Okay, so on behalf of the Omega Plus team, I would I'm so honored to be the one to ask Professor the very first question on the list. So, Professor, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, first question, what do you consider as the most fundamental insight that is generated in your recent book, The Journey of Humanity?
Well, so broadly speaking, the book explores the evolution of human societies since the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa nearly 300,000 years ago. And it resolves, in fact, two of the most fundamental mysteries that surrounds this journey. What I defined as the mystery of growth, namely what brought about this dramatic transformation in living standards in the past 200 years, after literally hundreds of thousands of years of near stagnation. Why is it the case that income per capita in the world economy has increased 14-fold in the past 200 years after near stagnation over the entire course of human history? And why is it the case that life expectancy in the past 200 years has doubled after stagnating and fluctuating in a very narrow range of 25 to 40 over most of human existence? And the second mystery is the mystery of inequality, namely, what is the origin of this vast inequality in living standards across the globe? Why some countries are rich and others are poor, and what led into the divergence in the wealth of nations in the past 200 years? Now, the book, to a large extent, advances a revolutionary hypothesis about the roots of inequality today. It suggests that much of the inequality as we see it today is originated in the distant past. It suggests that forces that operated hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, and even tens of thousands of years ago are still affecting economic development, and they account for a significant portion of the inequality across the globe today. And this is very important because it implies that if we would like to design policies to mitigate inequality across the globe, we will have to have a better understanding of the specific history of each individual nation, and we will have to turn to this particular course of development was to mitigate the legacy of the past.
Thank you very much for your answer, Professor. So the book actually discovers some of the most important mysteries in the human evolution and growth. And I am sure that readers will find more detailed and fascinating answers to their curiosity when reading your book. All right.
Absolutely.
So for the next question, I will pass on the mic to Dr. Thành Tự Anh. So, Doctor, can you please help me to lead the second question, please?
Thank you, Linh. It is my great honor to have this conversation with you, Professor Galor. And as introduced by Linh, the Fulbright School of Public Policy and Management has collaborated with Omega Plus to translate your book into Vietnamese. And I have the privilege to edit it. And every chapter of your book reminds me about my time at graduate school, actually at Boston College, not far from Brown. And during that time, I was diving deeply into many generations of growth models, starting with Harold Dormer and slow swan models of exogenous growth, and then moved to endogenous growth models of Arrow, Romer, Lucas, among others. And for a long time in economics, there has been an elusive quest for an unified growth theory that can explain two mysteries of growth, of inequalities that you discuss in your book. And now comes your book, in which you develop a unified theory that sheds light on the forces that govern the transitions from Malthusian's epoch of stagnation to an era of sustained growth in living standards. So could you please introduce your theory and how the mysteries of the long run development process uncovers insights of your theory. And can you also explain what makes your theory a unified one? Because I think this is a really big claim. And how your theory fulfills the promises that other growth theories fail to achieve so far.
Yes. Unified growth theory that I advanced over the years uncovers the wheels of change that have governed the journey of humanity since the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa 300,000 years ago. And in fact, when I developed the theory, the main motivation behind this development was the understanding that, in fact, significant portion of the variations in inequality across the globe today can be traced to forces that operated in the distant past. And consequently, only a unified theory of economic growth, a theory that can link the forces that operated in the past to the forces that are operating today, will be in a good position to decipher the roots of inequality and ultimately to lead us to design policies that could mitigate inequality across the globe. So unified growth theory is an attempt to unify our understanding of the growth process in its entirety, rather than having a separate theory for the modern growth regime and a separate theory for the Malthusian epoch, having a single theory that links the past to the present, as I said, based on the realization that much of the inequality that we see today is based on forces that operated in the distant past. So in particular, unified growth theory is an attempt to understand how societies evolve since the emergence of Homo sapiens, as I said, 300,000 years ago. And the theory uncovers the wheels of change, namely those forces that operated throughout the course of human history and ultimately permitted societies to move from stagnation to growth. And the theory suggests the following. If you think about the emergence of anatomically modern human in Africa 300,000 years ago, at the time, the size of the human population is rather modest. Nevertheless, humans are equipped with a powerful brain, the human brain. And this powerful brain is permitting humanity to advance the technological frontier. Now, these advancements initially are very, very slow. It is a pace that is basically generating one stone tool that is replaced by another stone tool. But nevertheless, with the advancement of every stone tool, the resources that are available for humanity are larger than before, and these resources permit more people to be supported. So each family, each tribe has more resources than before. More children are able to survive to adulthood, more children are being born, and ultimately resources are being divided by a larger number of people. So technological progress is generating short-term increase in human prosperity, but ultimately population growth is consuming this surplus and resources per person reverts back to the previous equilibrium position. But over the entire course of human history, we see this reinforcing interaction between population, technology, and human adaptation. Technological progress advances, the size of the human population increases, and as a result of it, we have larger number of potential innovators. These potential innovators are generating further technological progress, faster technological progress that supports even more people than before. But over 99.9% of human existence, this process is not changing the material well-being of the population. Living standards remain unchanged. What we see over this time period, nevertheless, is a great change in the pace of technological progress, a great change in the size of the human population, and a great change in the adaptation of the human population. So during this Malthusian epoch, we have this interesting dualism. On the one hand, stagnation in living standards, but on the other hand, dynamism in the context of technology, dynamism in the context of population, and dynamism in the context of human adaptation. Nevertheless, over 99.9% of human existence, societies remain in a Malthusian trap. Namely, living standards remain largely unchanged. But over this 300,000 year period, we move from Stone Age technology to steam engine technology. We move from a population in the eve of the agricultural revolution of about 2.5 million people on planet Earth to about 1 billion people in the midst of industrialization, a 400-fold increase. And this reinforcing interaction between technology, the size of the human population, and the adaptation of the human population is bringing the pace of technological progress to such a level that in order to cope with this rapidly changing technological environment, parents must start to invest in the education of their kids. So for the first time in human history, we see investment in human capital, investment in education that is designed to satisfy industrial needs. Parents start to invest in the education of their children. This investment is costly, and as a result of it, they have to economize on other elements in their budget constraint. They cannot economize on their own consumption because their own consumption is very close to the subsistence level. And as a result of it, they reduce the number of children. And this reduction in the number of children is freeing the growth process from the counterbalancing effect of population. It is no longer the case, as was over 99.9% of human existence, that technological progress is simply leading into larger population. Now, technological progress is converted into more prosperous people. So it is the decline in fertility that frees the growth process from the counterbalancing effect of population, and the world is sailing into the modern growth regime. So unified growth theory is basically the theory that permits us to understand how few people that emerged in Africa 300,000 years ago led inevitably into the Industrial Revolution and into the takeoff from stagnation to growth. These few people innovated, they supported larger amount of people supported faster pace of technological progress, up to the point in which technological progress was so rapid so as to demand investment in human capital. This generated a fertility decline and freed the growth process from the counterbalancing effect of population and led into the modern growth regime.
All right. Thank you so much for your detailed answer, Professor. It was amazing, an amazing walkthrough to the human history. So, Dr. Nguyễn Thắng, do you have any comments on the professor's answer?
Thank you very much for the very clear and concise answer. Actually, I read the theories more than 10 years, over more than 10 years, and then every time I listen again, your explanation of theory is always refresh my mind, and I learn something from that. And I would like to start again from the assessment by Adam Smith. Adam Smith said that the theory that can absorb the greatest number of facts and permits doing so generation by generation through all change of opinion and detail is one that must rule all observation. So I would say unified growth theory is not a theory that Adam Smith applied. Yes, so we apply for the economic and social science. And as we can learn from the Professor Galor answer, so indeed, unified growth theory provides a fundamental micro foundation, macro framework of the analysis for the evolution of individuals, households, and societies over the entire course of human history. By that, the unified growth theory helps us to understand better the world we are living today and how it links to the distant past. Particularly, it uncovers the journey of humanity that is characterized by two of the most fundamental mysteries. Professor Gallo introduced from beginning. The first one, the mystery of growth, and second one, the mystery of inequality in living standard across the globe. So, no need to say that is an elegant and powerful theory, and more importantly, this theory, to my opinion, this theory and its prediction has been grounded and supported systematically by empirical evidence over the 2 last decades. Yes, that is really, really powerful theory. Thank you a lot for your contribution.
Thank you so much for your sharing, Dr. Thắng. And yes, Dr. Thắng has already told me that he thought that Professor's theory is elegant and beautiful. And I have to agree to that to some extent. So, okay, so for the next question, the third question on the list, I would like to ask Dr. Thắng to be the one to lead.
Yeah. Okay, so my question is that I learned from the book that, contrary to Karl, we argue that instead of communist revolution, industrialization triggers the education to the mass. And could you please explain why and how did it happen?
Absolutely. So Marx, to a large extent, held a view that the process of industrialization and the process of capital accumulation will lead gradually into greater and greater competition among capitalists, and consequently will diminish gradually the profit rates that capitalists can generate from the production process. This decline in profit rates will force capitalists to exploit labor more than before, and consequently, at a certain point, wages of workers will be so low so as to cause them to feel that they have nothing to lose but their chains. And as a result of it, according to Marx, this will lead into a revolution and a change in the class structure of the society. And according to unified growth theory, what Marx failed to understand is the importance of human capital in the production process. So when industrialization started to take place and capital accumulation started to take place, sooner or later, capitalists realize that in fact, in order to sustain their profit rates, they need more educated labor force. And as a result of it, it is the capitalists in England in the course of the 19th century that lobbied intensively in the British Parliament so as to assure that the British Parliament will approve free and public education for the masses. The capitalists realize, as I said, that by educating the masses, by educating their workers, they will be able to sustain their profit rates because it will complement capital in the production process, and consequently it is in their incentive to invest in the human capital of the workers. Nevertheless, they realize that they cannot do the investment themselves. In each firm will invest in the education of the workers. The day after, the worker can cross the road and move to another firm, and the investment will be lost. And as a result of it, they ask the government to provide public education that will be supported by the public as a whole, and this will generate a supply of educated youth that will be available for all the capitalists. So the irony is, in fact, the Industrial Revolution did not lead into a communist revolution, it led into revolution in mass education. Because in fact, it was a common interest of workers and capitalists to have education and to have the workers being educated. There was no conflict between the two classes. There was in fact a common interest between the two that led, as I said, into a revolution of mass education rather than a communist revolution.
Thank you so much for your answer, Professor. As a Vietnamese myself, I am no stranger to the ideologies of Marx, but I must say that Professor's answers is quite convincing to me as well. So, Dr. Thành Tự Anh, do you have any thoughts on this, please?
I have one very brief observation, which is it's interesting that Marx concerned himself with the analysis of capitalism crisis, in which he focused on the conflict between the means of production and the social relationship of production. But he didn't foresee a newly emerging form of capital, which is the human capital, that's not only decisively help mitigate or even resolve the problems of class struggle, like Professor Galor just analyzed, but also the human capital play a very critical role and became the driving force behind the demographic transition that elevated humanities from Malthusian epochs of stagnation. And when I read the explanation in the book, I find very convincing, and I think this is really an important story that needs to be taught alongside other Marxian theories in universities around the world, and especially in Vietnam and China and other countries.
Yes, thank you so much for your sharing. I think that this will be a controversial idea in Vietnam, but it is worth taking a look. So I think it's time to move on to our next question. So are you ready, Professor?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much. So the fourth question is, why has the takeoff from stagnation to growth over the past 2 centuries brought amazing growth, but also huge global inequality?
Right, so as I suggested earlier, over most of human existence, societies were in a Malthusian stagnation. And during this time period, technological progress was converted into more people rather than into richer people. But over these 300,000 years of human existence, technological progress started to accelerate up to this tipping point in which technological progress generated a demand for human capital. It brought about a demographic transition and the movement into the sustained growth regime. But when this movement took place, it did not take place at the same time period across the globe. Some societies moved into the sustained growth regime centuries earlier than others, and since this transition, on average, was associated with a 14-fold increase in income per capita, an enormous divergence occurred in the world economy. So Western Europe and their offshoots in North America are taking off towards the end of the 18th century, 19th century. Other societies across the globe, perhaps most conspicuously Sub-Saharan Africa, is taking off only towards the end of the 20th century. And this implies that an enormous divergence is taking place across the globe. Some societies remain for another 2 centuries in the Malthusian epoch, and their standard of living is now changing, whereas other societies are moving into the modern growth regime and their income per capita is increasing 15-fold, 20-fold, and even 100-fold. And as a result of it, an enormous divergence is occurring in the world economy in the past 200 years. If you look at the world economy, say in the year 1800, and we compare the richest region of the world and the poorest region of the world, the ratio of income per capita between the richest region of the world and the poorest one is about 3 to 1. But if we look at the same ratio today, it can be 15 to 1, 20 to 1, and even 100 to 1, depending on how we define region. So part of the inequality that we see across the globe today, in fact, most of it, is emerging in the past 200 years due to the differential timing of the transition across the globe. And this differential timing has to do with barriers that countries face in their process of accumulation and in their process of technological progress. Namely, some societies over the course of human history developed institutions and cultural traits that are growth enhancing. Other societies had institutions and cultural traits that were growth retarding, and as a result of it, at the beginning of the 19th century, some societies were ready for a takeoff, other societies were not, and this led into an enormous divergence across the globe. So ultimately, it is institutional characteristics, cultural characteristics, geographical characteristics, and human diversity, all formed in the distant past, that led into the differential timing of the transition from stagnation to growth, and consequently led into much of the inequality as we see today across the globe.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your answer. So, Dr. Thắng, do you have any comments on this matter?
Yeah, thank you for the answer. To me, that's a very convincing explanation that grounded on the solid theory and with empirical evidence support. As you may see from the answer from Professor Gallo, this answer covered the deepest roots of wealth inequality across the globe. And what we observe over the two last centuries as indeed a consequence of the accumulating the persistent effect of these deep root factors, generating the difference in the timing of industrialization or the timing of takeoff across society. And I would like to note an influential paper written by Professor Gallo and his co-author. That I remember this paper published in the review committee study, showing that the international trade during the last 2 centuries amplified the wealth inequality across societies. The mechanism is through the specialization that transmitted the gain of trade in a different way. So the gain of trade is transmitted to the expanding unskilled population in the country with a comparative advantage for agricultural production. Why is increased human capital accumulation associated with decline in fertility in the country with a comparative advantage in manufacturing production? So that is very, very relevant and consistent with what we observed the diversion during the two last century. And thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor, for your sharing. So I think that it is time to move on to the 5th question on the list. So I will pass on the mic to Dr. Thành Tự Anh. Can you please help me to lead the 5th question, please?
So my question is, Professor Galor, as you argued in your book, the current economic growth and inequality of countries depends on the forces that can be traced back thousands or even 100,000 years ago. And it may leave an impression that growth and equality are fate, and the current generations can't do much about it. So can you please elaborate on this point to avoid confusions and misunderstanding that some readers may have?
Absolutely. So that's very important, and I would like, in fact, to take the time to explain that despite the fact that much of the inequality as we see it across the globe today is originated in the distant past, history is not a fate. It is not the case that societies are condemned to poverty for the entire trajectory in the future. In fact, by understanding our history, we will be in a better position to design policies that will mitigate the effect of the past. So if we understand how geography, how human diversity, how cultural traits, and how institutional characteristics affected the position of societies in the course of human history, we will be in a better position to redesign policies in a way that will foster cultural characteristics that are growth enhancing and will defy the legacy of geography. We will be in a better position to adopt institutional setup that is growth enhancing, again, defying the geographical heritage of this society, and we'll be in a better position to design education policies that could mitigate the legacy in the context of diversity and its impact on development. So the important part is to understand that, in fact, the inequality that we see across the globe today can be mitigated. In fact, convergence can take place in the world economy, but this will require a wise policy. Policies that were adopted in the past, that were basically saying that one policy will fit all countries at once, are not applicable. We really have to understand better the history of each individual society, the geography of each individual society, the legacy of diversity of each individual society, and to target the policies in such a way so as to mitigate this historical legacy and to permit, as I said, prosperity in the world as a whole. So universal prosperity is possible, history is not a fate, and in fact, as I said, by understanding our past, we will be in a better position to design our future.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I especially love your expression that history is not fate. I think that it is a motivation for developing countries such as Vietnam to move forward in the future. So, Dr. Thắng, what do you think about this?
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose it's Dr. Tự Anh, but it's no problem. I can make a comment on this question. So I do agree with you. The history is not a fate, and it opened the opportunity for the follower like Vietnam to catch up, and we understand the theory and the human the journey of humanity and the factor behind. Behind the growing mystery, and we understand all of them, which guarantee that it started in the better position in design the future. That is very important. So, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And Dr. Thành Tự Anh, can you please share us your thought, please?
Sure. I believe a country legacies, be it geographic, historical, cultural, or institutional, are not fate. And looking back at our own experience, more than 95% of Vietnam's improvement in terms of GDP per capita growth happened in the last 4 decades. Since we started reform in Vietnam, we call it đổi mới. And despite the fact that there is a very little we could do to change our geography or history, Vietnam has been, performed very well in the last 3 or 4 decades in terms of economic growth, and at the same time maintain a certain level of equality in the countries. I also strongly agree that development policy should be history and country specific. Again, look at Vietnam experience. Vietnam only adopted the Washington Consensus selectively, but even those in retrospective, only a small set of this policy actually work. For example, the enterprise, the SOE reform is not really working, but the market-oriented reform and the international trade reform is really working in Vietnam. So I really believe that if we have the mentality or the strategy of one-size-fits-all policy, it's not going to work. And the book of Professor Galor provide very convincing arguments that we really need to look into each and specific countries or regions case studies in order to prescribe the right policy to deal with the problem in those countries or regions.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Yes, and okay, so I think that it is time to move on to the 6 questions on the list. So I would like to ask Dr. Thắng to be the one to lead the 6th question, please.
Okay, so in the last chapter of your book, you focus on the effect of population diversity on the development and comparative development across the globe. And what are the policy implications in providing towards stimulating development in general and for the case of Vietnam in particular, given that the population diversity in Vietnam appears to be below the optimal level?
When we think about societal diversity in general, societal diversity is associated with conflicting effects on productivity. On the one hand, diversity enhances cross-fertilization of ideas, complementarity in the production process, and consequently, greater innovations. But on the other hand, societal diversity is associated with social non-cohesiveness, mistrust, disagreement about the desirable public goods, and as a result of it, social unrest and civil conflicts. So, given the fact that there are 2 conflicting effects, it turns out that societies that are highly diverse or societies that are highly homogeneous are not performing as well as societies with an intermediate level of diversity. Namely, there is a sweet spot level of diversity that balances between the positive effect of diversity in terms of innovativeness and the adverse effect in terms of social cohesiveness. Now, when we review the impact of diversity in the process of development, it is interesting to note that in the Middle Ages, societies that were optimally diverse were societies in Southeast Asia, societies such as China, Japan, or Korea. Now, typically, when we think about these societies today, we do not think about these societies that are optimally diverse. We view them largely as very, very homogeneous. But this was a different time period. It was a time period in which social cohesiveness was much more important for productivity than innovativeness. And as a result of it, the level of diversity in these societies was precisely balancing between the 2 conflicting effects. It generated great amount of cohesiveness, and it didn't depress innovativeness too much. But as we move into the modern world, from the Middle Ages, say the 21st century, it turns out that the society that is optimally diverse today is in fact the US society, the American society. And again, we moved into a much more demanding technological environment. And in this demanding technological environment, diversity, cultural fluidity, cultural flexibility is very important in permitting societies to cope with this rapidly changing technological environment. So in the course of human history, we see that the optimal level of diversity has increased from the one that existed in Southeast Asia in the Middle Ages to the one that exists today in North America. Now, what are the implications of this for a society like Vietnam? According to my research, a society like Vietnam will be relatively homogeneous, will be more homogeneous than is optimal for the society. And the question again, is history here is a fate, or can we design policies that will foster greater diversity in a society like Vietnam? So one possibility to foster diversity is migration. But migration is typically controversial because naturally many cultures would like to maintain their cultural identity, and they are reluctant to permit other groups to be integrated into the society. But this doesn't imply that a society that will not be affected by migration cannot foster diversity in other means. And what I suggest is that education policies can be used in order to foster diversity in societies that are relatively homogeneous, like the society in Vietnam. And how can it be done? Naturally, we have limited resources and we have to use these resources effectively. And the idea is basically to design a curriculum that will emphasize the ability of pupils, the ability of students to think outside of the box, to have critical thinking, to challenge the status quo, and to generate pluralism in a place where it is missing. So if part of the cultural heritage, if part of the diversity in the society is such that there is great respect for all tradition, great respect for elderlies in general, then again, part of the education system should operate in a way that will permit students to feel comfortable, to challenge the status quo, to challenge conventional wisdom so as to generate pluralism that will ultimately benefit the society in terms of cross-fertilization of ideas. So as I said before, history is not a fate. Yes, the society in Vietnam, the society in China, the society in Japan, all these societies are relatively homogeneous, but in fact, the education system can be used in order to foster cultural diversity, to foster pluralism, and ultimately to enhance innovations and productivity.
Thank you so much for your answer, Professor. I agree that the social diversity can lead to both pros and cons in the development of a country. And I especially love the idea that the education system can be changed to create more diversity and creative thinking in youngsters, and it will eventually lead to the innovation in the future. So thank you, Dr. Thank you, Professor. And Dr. Vũ Thành Tự Anh, as a member of the Fulbright University of Vietnam, what is your opinion about this?
Again, I believe it is Đặng Nguyên Thang's reply, but I provide my my comment as well. When you talk about challenging status quo, Professor Galor, it reminds me immediately about the situation in East Asia and Southeast Asia in the 18th and 19th century. Those societies that had the will and had the space to challenge the status quo, especially in this case is Japan, will open up a vast new opportunities for growth. And on the contrary, society like China or Vietnam, which always follows the status quo, don't have the space to challenge the status quo, will be stagnated for the next century. So I think this is a really, really interesting explanation. And from the perspective of a, from educational perspective as an educator myself, I really think that in Vietnam nowadays, we really need a different kind of education. That's why at Fulbright universities, we promote and trying to bring the liberal art education, or probably more precisely liberal education in general, to Vietnam, to introduce the younger generation, so that, as you said, they can think critically, think outside the box, adopt new values and a new way of thinking. And probably the most important thing is they should be able to think for and by themselves. Don't rely on others for the right or wrong answers. I think this is really important observations and advice for how to reform and change the Vietnamese education system and curriculum in general.
Thank you, Doctor. And please pardon me for this change in roles. These are actually like really interesting questions. So I would like to listen to the opinions of both Vietnamese scholars. So, okay, so it's time for Dr. Nguyễn Thang's opinion. Can you please share with us your thoughts?
Yeah, thank Professor Galor for the answer. And thank Dr. Tự Anh as well. And I really share the view of Dr. Tự Anh, and of course the view of Professor Galor. And I remember that 10 years ago, I received a working paper on the Africa hypothesis. Yeah, and so the first thing after I reading your paper, I think about Vietnam. So obviously, population diversity is below the optimal level. So at that time, I think, okay, the history may be a fate. Now you change my views dramatically. So okay, at that time I also compared Vietnam and Japan. So it's quite different. Japan, they have a very low population diversity, but they was ahead of Asia, and they can catch up the Western world. And to my best of my knowledge, the hypothesis of population diversity on development is quite used, but the distinguish from your work is, I think, is very important and interesting, is that you point out the mechanism, the conflicting effect between the beneficial effect and the conflict effect of the population diversity. It's very interesting and important for designing education system and social policy towards facilitating the advantage and mitigate the disadvantage of the population diversity. And for the case of Vietnam, remember, I was educated in Vietnam in economics 20 years ago. And at that time, so what I learned from the university, so basically we believe what the teacher taught us. And one of the important course I have to take is the history of academic thought, and in which I was taught the Marxist theory. Unfortunately, I was taught in the wrong way. It's very dangerous. So when I started my PhD in Belgium, and I started to read the paper, and it dramatically changed my view. Oh, it's beautiful theory, powerful theory. So I opened my mind. So I discussed with my friend, with my professor, and then all of them changed my views. And now I understand correctly how beautiful Marxian theory is. And that is important. So actually in Vietnam nowadays, we have talked and discussed a lot about the critical thinking, openness, and skepticism. Or in other words, we call that the liberal art education. So now from the book and from the answer, I think that we now have a more fundamental background to design our education system, although there has been abundant challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your sharing. I believe that to read more books such as The Journey of Humanity from Professor Oded Galor, and to be now able to have access to the curriculum such as from the Fulbright University. The future of Vietnam education will be really bright. Okay, so we are coming to the very last question on the list. And for the seventh question, I would like to ask Dr. Vũ Thành Tự Anh to be the lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linh. The question I would like to ask is, as a person editing your book and supervising the translation team, I can see the great expectation of your book, by the Vietnamese audience. And this is the first time your book is translated and published in Vietnam. Considering your new insights, could you be so kind to offer your observations on how Vietnam, as a rather latecomer, should do to take advantage of its own demographic transition and the global industrial revolution to achieve long-run and sustained prosperity?
Absolutely. So if we think about a society like Vietnam, more generally developing societies, I think that the recipe to a large extent that is generated from my research suggests that we have to emphasize certain elements so as to assure sustained economic growth and prosperity in the long run. The first one is investment in education. But this investment in education, as I said earlier, has to be a particular one. It has to be investment in flexible education, education that can permit workers to shift from one industry to another, to shift from one occupation to another, rather than emphasizing vocational training, rather than emphasizing specific human capital. The emphasis should be on general human capital that would permit workers in this rapidly changing technological environment to be more adaptable and to be able to cater to the needs of different industries and different changes that will occur in the environment. So this is the first element. The second one has to do with sustaining low fertility rates. So I realized that there was an incredible decline in fertility rates in Vietnam, but fertility rates in Vietnam are still above replacement level, suggesting the sum of the progress that is being made in terms of technology are being counterbalanced by population growth. And this is another key element in the process of development. I think that inducements, incentives should be there so as to reduce fertility further, so as to remove the counterbalancing effect of population growth on the growth in income per capita. The third element that is critical for any society and will be critical for the Chinese society is to promote gender equality. Gender equality has two important dimensions. Beyond the moral one, the economic ones are permitting labor force participation of women, which will naturally enhance productivity and will enhance the diversity and the cross-fertilization of ideas in the labor force. But in addition, will increase the opportunity cost of having children and will foster the fertility decline even further. So again, a third critical element is fostering gender equality. And the last one is connected to what we discussed earlier. In a society like Vietnam, that is relatively homogeneous, it is vital to design an education curriculum that will foster further cultural diversity. In the absence of cultural diversity, in the absence of cultural fluidity, societies will not be able to prosper in a time of rapid technological change. The environment is changing very rapidly. It requires adaptation at the level of the individual. It requires an adaptation at the level of the society. and unless the society is providing individuals the freedom to challenge the status quo, to challenge the conventional wisdom, the society will not be able to prosper in the long run. So again, much of the effort should be devoted to assure that cultural fluidity, cultural diversity, pluralism is respected in the Vietnamese society that at the moment is relatively homogeneous. Now, another important element, broadly speaking, is the decisions about the adoptions of different industries. So naturally, when we think about developing societies and the trade between developing societies and developed societies, the asymmetry that exists in the world economy at the moment is inducing developing societies to specialize in the production of agricultural goods, to specialize in the production of primary goods, and to specialize in the production of industrial goods that are low skill intensive. And this is a trap in the long run. There are very limited externalities from the production of agricultural goods. There are very limited externalities from the production of industries that is low skill intensive. And as I said before, given the asymmetry that was generated in the world economy, there is a great incentive for less developed societies to specialize in the production of goods that are produced less efficiently in the developed world. But this is a trap in the long run. One has to think about the dynamic element here, and consequently, a society like Vietnam should assure that at the same time, there is an investment in intermediate skill industries and high-tech industries, because ultimately, these industries will generate a demand for human capital, will foster human capital formation, that down the road will make it more and more profitable for entrepreneurs to bring back technologies that are more skill intensive, more education incentives, that have great technological spillover in the future. So as I said, it is a very difficult decision to implement because the incentives for less developed societies is always to specialize in the production of rudimentary goods, of agricultural goods, of low-skill industrial goods. But there should be a very deliberate effort, first to promote education so as to make it more profitable for entrepreneurs, to bring back technologies that demand education, but at the same time, to give an incentive for entrepreneurs to develop high-tech industries, to develop intermediate skill industries, so as to generate this interaction between education and technologies that will generate prosperity in the long run. Again, it's very important to counter this initial incentive and short-sighted gains in the short run that are inducing many less developed societies to specialize in goods that are very profitable in the short run, but are dead end in the long run. So a society like Vietnam should invest more resources in assuring that there is a mix of industries that are operating, and the mix is changing gradually towards intermediate skills industries and high-tech industries in the long run.
Thank you so much for your answer, Professor. It is true that there is no shortcut for the development of Vietnam, and I'm sure that Professor's answers has given us so many foods for thoughts. So, Dr. Vũ Thành Tự Anh, can you please share with us your thoughts on the answer, please?
Thank you, Professor Galor, for your valuable observation and suggestions. I couldn't agree more. Among the 4 suggestions in the first half of your answers, I think Vietnam has implemented the second and the third policies. By 1986, when Vietnam started its market reform the fertility rate is about 4.0, and now it's about 2.0. But as you observe, there's still, the space for improvement in terms of reducing the fertility rate. As for another point about gender, I think Vietnam is, unlike other traditional society in Southeast Asia or East Asia, we don't have the gender issues as serious as other countries. And the rate of labor force participation for women in Vietnam is currently more than 70%, pretty high compared to other countries in the region. Vietnam, however, does need to provide more flexible education and promote diversity, as you mentioned, to prepare ourselves for the ever-changing environment in the world. Your last point about giving priority to skill-intensive rather than low-skill-intensive industries is particularly relevant to Vietnam, and I think this is a challenge that make the Vietnamese leadership, wake up at night, because we are, in a sense, has been trapped by our own success in attracting low skill and labor intensive industries, which provide a lot of jobs for the young population, but at the same time, as you said, produce little externalities, and therefore doesn't help us to adapt to new technology and to upgrade our industries. So this is a big challenge, not only in terms of industrial developments, but also it keeps our country in the middle income trap, because it's really hard to improve the productivity and to upgrade the industries. But anyway, as you said, there's no shortcut, and it's easier said than done. And I believe it is a huge challenge for Vietnam moving forward.
Thank you so much for your share, Doctor. Dr. Thắng, do you have any opinions on this? I would like to also listen to your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Linh. And I really share the view of Professor Galor and Professor Tự Anh. And actually, Professor know much more than me, and I learned a lot from his sharing. So I think I have an additional opinions related to the institution of Vietnam. So I think it's important also. Yeah, the institution can participate all and have to implement all the policies that Professor Gallo pointed out. So I think that is the necessary condition for facilitating the policy stimulating development of Vietnam. So because follow the galaxy the communism. So in Vietnam, the state still control a lot on the economic activity. We still have a lot of the state enterprise, right? Like the electricity and energy and public transportation. Like the Vietnam Airlines, for example. So how to change the institution? I think is the big question. And the big question. So maybe the starting point is the reform the education system, right? And generation by generation, when the human capital accumulate enough, so at some point of time, they can have to change institution and towards the favor state for the development. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your sharing, Doctor. So I think that we have walked through all of 7 questions in today's interview. So right now, I would like to ask for your thoughts and sharing after the interview. So Professor Oded Galor, would you mind to be the first one to share?
Yes. Yeah, so this will be a general message to your readers, to the Vietnamese readers. I wrote the book in such a way so as to make it accessible to every individual. I would hope that, in fact, people that even are at the moment in their high school education will be able to read the book and to benefit from the book. It is written in such a way that the top specialists can benefit from it, and I think that every page has, in some sense, fantastic research ideas, but at the same time it is written in a way that every individual, regardless of previous training, can read the book. The book is jargon-free, it has full of interesting anecdotes, it has full of lessons from history, there's a lot of aspects that are simply intriguing about the evolution of the human brain and the reason for the evolution of the human brain, the transition to agriculture. Was this transition, as suggested by some, the biggest mistake in human history? Of course not, but you can read the answer in the book. It has a lot of underlying theories, a lot of interesting anecdotes, a lot of interesting stories. I think that the book, to a large extent, will be pleasing to read and will be very enriching for every individual, regardless of their discipline. And I therefore encourage your readers to take the book, to read it carefully. It is relatively short and nevertheless very comprehensive, so it can make a very nice reading for a weekend or a week. And I certainly encourage your readers to delve into it and to benefit from it.
Thank you so much, Professor. And as a part of the Omega Plus team, I'm so happy that you have accepted our offer and let Omega Plus be the one to bring your book to readers of Vietnam. And I really hope that more Vietnamese readers will be able to have access to your ideas, to your stories, and to the messages that you wish to convey. And so thank you very much. So Dr. Vũ Thành Tự Anh, can you please share with us your thoughts after the interview, please?
I learned a lot from this interview. Although I read the book quite a few times and edited the book in Vietnamese, but I still learn a lot in this conversation. I think the book is extremely accessible and important. I really believe that the Vietnamese audience, both the real expert in the field or the lay audience, can benefit extremely from this book, from reading this book. For myself, I think I learned almost every new things in each and every page of the book. Or the book changed some of my views that I hold for a long time. Another, which is very interesting thing, is it is a short book. Instead of like writing the history of humanities for 300,000 of years in about 300 pages is incredible. I think it's really impressive. You put so much knowledge and insight into a very concise book that is accessible to almost everyone. This is a great achievement. And my final thought is this provides a lot of thoughts for all of us, for the policymakers, for the economists, for the educators, and for the general audience. But at the same time, I really hope that this book will create lay the foundation for further discussion in the societies. because this is not the end of itself, right? So this is not the conclusion of history, and not the end of history, to use the word of Fukuyama. And I believe that it is the time for Vietnam to change, because it's somehow at a critical juncture. And the decision made in these critical junctures will determine the future of Vietnam for many decades to come. So I really hope that the public in general get access to the ideas presented in this book, have a vibrant and lively discussion about the insights, about the new, recommendations came out from this book, so that we can make a more fruitful and productive decision wherever we are, whichever position we have in the society. And I think the general education is really important here. It's not this book is not only for the academia or for the policymakers. I really hope that Omega Plus can bring it to the general audience, including the younger generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for being the editor of the book as well. So finally, I would like to ask Dr. Thắng for his thoughts, please.
Yes, sure. So not need to say that that is a very successful book. Yes, as it is. So when I read the book, I read the book when it appeared in March and April. And yes, I feeling that every main statement in the book have solid empirical evidence behind. That is amazing. It make the book different from the other book in this topic. So that is my feeling. So that is very important. So, and the way of writing is beautiful, and I think it's quite accessible for the general reader. And I would say when I read the article of Professor Galor, it's also accessible for the people with the not so strong background in economics. So it's very important. Like me, when I first year of the PhD student, just my background in economy is poor, I would say, and I learned a lot. And again, now I read the book and I review everything I learned before. So I benefit a lot from the reading of that book, and I'm sure that this book also benefit for the many other people. And particularly, I'm very happy that book appear in Vietnamese versions. So I'm sure that it will be helpful for not only for students but also for the researcher, for the reader as well, if they have a time to read the book. And of course, I strongly recommend people, the policymaker and researcher, read the book. And for the student, I hope that they, as for student and the lecturer in a university in Vietnam, they can change the way to teach economic history. Yeah, the way teaching here, they did economic history before. They just did like they tell the event, something like that, and they tell the not really a story. Yeah, they tell the event, and the student have to accept and have to believe what the teacher taught. But now I think they from this book, if they read the book seriously, they can change the view and they change the way of teaching in economic history. So every event have a reason behind, and they should based on the economic theory to explain the history. So, and I'm sure that this book is not only benefit for the economic student, economic lecturer, but also for the other social scientists. And finally, I thank Omega Plus a lot to translate and Omega Plus and translation team to transfer this book into Vietnamese version. I'm so happy for that.
Yes, thank you very much. We are very happy to be the official publisher of the book in Vietnamese as well. So, Professor, do you have any more things to share?
Well, I just want to say that I'm really delighted that the book was translated to Vietnamese, and I'm really delighted that it has the potential to have an impact, as suggested earlier, at a critical juncture in the trajectory of Vietnam. I do think that, in fact, the book holds key insights for prosperity of humanity in the long run and the prosperity of the Vietnamese society in the long run. So I really hope that the book will have an impact and will somehow promote equality and universal prosperity in the world and in Vietnam.
Thank you so much, Professor. As a partner, as a part of the Omega Plus team, I also hope that this book will spark more interesting thoughts, sparks more conversations in Vietnam, and it will be a success in our market. So I think we are coming to the end of today's interview, and I would like to thank you all once more for having participated with me today. Thank you so much, and have a great day ahead.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Thank you, Professor Galor. Thank you, Thắng, Linh. Bye.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye. Yes. Okay. How can